God's chosen uns. The hidden truths are over. His directory opens the books. Chosen one, pause for a moment. This isn't just a message. It's your divine wake-up call. You didn't stumble here by chance. Heaven scheduled this moment. The ache in your spirit, the stirring that won't let you settle, it's not confusion, it's confirmation. Something sacred is unfolding, and your soul already knows it. This is the moment everything changes. Not someday, not eventually. No, because God has spoken, and if this found you, it means the shift has already begun. If you are God's chosen one, this message was written in heaven with your name on it. You were led here. I used to believe I was wandering. I'd pray, and the silence would feel louder than any answer. I'd ask God for direction, and be met with stillness. And deep down, I wondered if I had missed something. A door. A sign. A moment where I was supposed to say yes, but didn't. I kept walking, kept working. I kept hoping that the ache inside me meant something more was coming. But it wasn't until recently that I realized I was never lost. I was being led through the wilderness so I could learn to trust without evidence. Led through rejection so I could remember who I am without applause. Led through seasons of invisibility so I'd never confuse being seen with being chosen. And now, standing here in the stillness of a new morning, I don't feel lost anymore. I feel summoned, because this moment didn't happen by chance. It's not a coincidence that you're reading these words. The shift has already begun, not outside of you, but within you. And if you've been sensing it, that deep stirring, that divine discomfort, that sense that you can't stay the same, you're not wrong. You've outgrown who you used to be, not because you failed, but because you finished that version of your assignment. Now heaven is calling you forward. This isn't just a spiritual upgrade. This is a reintroduction to the person you were before fear got loud, before guilt made you hide, before life taught you to shrink. This is your invitation to rise. God is not calling you to strive. He's calling you to align, to step into what has already been prepared, not by proving yourself, but by remembering who you are. You've waited. You've wept. You've wondered if it would ever be your turn. And now heaven is whispering. The time is now. You were never behind. You were never overlooked. You were never forgotten. You were simply being refined, so that when the moment arrived, you'd recognize it not as an interruption, but as the very reason you were sent to earth. So take a breath, place your hand on your heart, and hear this deeply. You are not being called into the spotlight. You are being called into alignment. This is not hype. This is holy. And what you're feeling right now isn't emotional. It's prophetic, because everything is being revealed. Part 1. The countdown has already begun. Naomi didn't feel different the morning it started. The sky didn't change color. The wind didn't carry angelic whispers. No prophetic trumpet echoed from the heavens. But something inside her had shifted, and she couldn't ignore it anymore. There was a countdown in her spirit, and it had already begun. 7 days. That number echoed like a whisper wrapped in thunder. She didn't know why, but she knew what it meant. The walls, emotional, spiritual, situational, were about to come down. Not because she forced them, but because she was finally aligned. And when alignment meets divine timing, nothing stays the same. Naomi had been faithful through invisible seasons. She had obeyed without applause, sowed without evidence, prayed in silence, forgave in secret. Year after year, she moved forward by faith even when everything around her screamed, "Nothing is changing." But she knew what few are willing to believe, that heaven is never late. And when God moves, he doesn't knock, he opens. And this was it. Her opening, it reminded her of Jericho, how God told the Israelites to march in silence for 6 days, to trust without results, to move without understanding. And then, on the seventh day, everything shifted. What had stood in the way for years fell in moments, not because of strategy, because of surrender, because obedience is louder than logic in the ears of heaven. Naomi was walking through her own Jericho, walls that weren't made of stone but of silence, of doors that wouldn't open, of prayers that went unanswered for so long they became whispers, the walls of disappointment, of rejection, of betrayal, walls built not by enemies but by her own belief that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't chosen after all. But something in her spirit stirred, louder than her doubt. You are not circling in vain. You are walking prophecy into position. She was not stuck. She was being set up. This wasn't random. This wasn't new. Heaven had been scheduling this moment long before Naomi was even born. God had whispered it into the earth before she ever took her first breath. And now the countdown had reached day 1. 7 days. 7 sacred steps into a future she couldn't yet see, but her spirit already remembered. Because when you've been chosen by God, your soul knows before your eyes do. But here's what made it hard. Nothing on the outside looked different. Bills still came. People still doubted. The mirror still reflected someone who felt weary from the wait. But inside, heaven had turned the dial. And once heaven shifts the season, earth has no choice but to follow. That's the mystery of spiritual transition. You feel it before you see it. You know it before you can explain it. And if you wait until you understand to move, you'll miss the miracle. That's why Naomi chose to walk. Not because she had proof, but because she had permission. The kind of permission that can't be revoked. The kind that doesn't need validation. The kind that says, the door is open, now move like you believe it. In the next 7 days, she may not see lightning fall from the sky, but she will feel something break loose. A phone call, a dream, a shift in her heart, a weight lifted. It might be small in the eyes of others, but in heaven's timeline, it is everything. Because God doesn't need a year to change your life. He needs your yes. And once your yes meets His timing, the countdown isn't just activated, it's unstoppable. The calendar on her kitchen wall didn't show anything special, but the one in heaven? It was glowing. Angels were already dispatched. Favor was already in motion. What once felt blocked had already begun to break open. But it wouldn't fall without her faith. Because obedience doesn't just unlock doors, it opens realms. Naomi had spent years being prepared for a moment like this, and now the moment was responding to the sound of her faith. Not loud, not proud, but present. She whispered a prayer. Nothing elaborate, just this. I don't know what you're doing, Lord, but I trust you, and I'll walk. And that whisper became the first trumpet, the first step, the first swing of heaven's hammer against the wall. Each step forward that week wouldn't just be natural, it would be prophetic. And so she moved, brushing her teeth, cooking dinner, returning phone calls, opening old journals. It didn't look like spiritual warfare, but every act done in alignment was shaking the gates. Because warfare isn't always wailing. Sometimes warfare looks like walking forward when fear says freeze. Divine insight to close part 1. You're not circling in delay, you're marching in alignment. And the 7th day is already on heaven's calendar. Part 2. The season of waiting is over. Naomi stood at the window, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had long gone cold. Outside, the world moved like any other Tuesday. But inside, something was unraveling. And it wasn't panic, it was peace. The kind of peace that doesn't come from finally arriving, but from finally knowing. She wasn't in the hallway anymore. That long, echoing place between not yet and maybe someday. No, this was different. This was arrival. The season of waiting had ended. Not with a bang, not with fireworks, not with the crowd clapping. It ended in the quiet surrender of one truth. She was already enough to begin. Naomi set the mug down slowly and let her palms rest on the windowsill, feeling the cool surface ground her. A memory surfaced. Her knees pressed into the carpet of her bedroom floor, years ago, praying the same prayer night after night. God, when? When would it be her turn? When would the door open? When would she finally be seen, not just by others but by heaven itself? She had begged for a sign. She had searched for signals, but the only response was the passing of time and the ache of delay. Now she realized the sign wasn't coming, because the season had. For years, Naomi had confused waiting with proving. She thought maybe if she just healed a little more, prayed a little longer, perfected a little harder, then the promise would unlock. She waited for readiness like it was a destination, like heaven would give her a checklist to complete before the release. But what she didn't know is that God wasn't holding her back. She was, with every, I'm not ready yet. With every, I'll try again next season. With every, who am I to think I could be chosen? She had postponed herself, not out of rebellion, but out of reverence. Misplaced reverence for a fear disguised as humility. But God wasn't looking for her polish. He was looking for her permission. And now, after all the striving, she gave it. Not through effort, through trust. I'm not waiting anymore, she whispered. Not in bitterness, not in pride, but in revelation. Waiting had taught her what moving never could. How to hear God in silence. How to grow without recognition. How to carry joy without results. Waiting made her dangerous. It made her grounded. It made her unshakable. Because while others sprinted ahead chasing platforms and applause, she had learned to abide. Now the roots were deep, and what God was about to grow through her would never be moved by storms again. The atmosphere around her began to shift. No thunder, no lightning, just the unmistakable stillness of divine presence. The kind that tells you something is ending and something holy is beginning. Naomi felt it in her chest, not a panic, not an anxiety, a knowing, like stepping out of winter and realizing spring had come overnight. The grief was melting, the fear was cracking, and in its place expectancy rose. Heaven began to move. Not in ways she could predict, but in patterns she recognized. Because spiritual timing is not linear, it's prophetic. And when the season changes, even the wind starts to sound different. Little confirmations began to appear. A text message from a friend she hadn't heard from in years. A memory that returned with unexpected clarity. A verse she had underlined 5 years ago showing up in her heart like a fresh word. She opened her Bible to Isaiah 43. Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? She whispered. Yes, Lord, I perceive it now. God was no longer whispering. He was speaking clearly now. You're not stepping out of hiding. You're stepping into visibility. And visibility scared her. Not because she didn't want it, but because she had gotten used to being invisible. She had mastered the art of hiding in plain sight, smiling when she wanted to scream, serving when she wanted to sleep, showing up for others while secretly wondering if anyone would ever show up for her. But the wilderness had done its work, and now, the girl who once feared being seen was becoming the woman who carried sight. It's funny how seasons of delay can trick you into thinking delay is your destiny. But delay is not destiny. Delay is divine. Delay is where God builds what the crowd will one day see. Delay is sacred, but it is not permanent. The chrysalis was breaking. What was emerging wasn't Naomi 2. It was the original blueprint of heaven. Before heartbreak rewrote her self-worth. Before disappointment dimmed her vision. Before life taught her to settle for less than sacred. Naomi felt the weight of permission settle in her bones. She wasn't waiting for a green light anymore. She was the green light. God had already said yes. Now she had to say yes back. Yes, Lord, even if I'm still trembling. Yes, even if I don't feel qualified. Yes, even if I have to walk it alone. That's when she understood something most people miss. The end of waiting is not about physical movement. It's about spiritual agreement. And the moment Naomi agreed, the moment she believed what heaven had already spoken, the season shifted. She didn't walk out of waiting, waiting walked out of her. She was no longer stuck, she was summoned. It didn't mean everything became easy overnight, but the internal resistance, the questions, the insecurity, the need for one more sign, those began to dissolve. In their place, clarity. Not the kind that answers every question, but the kind that whispers, even if I don't know what's next, I know who's leading. And that was enough, because she didn't need a map. She had a shepherd. So Naomi rose. She rinsed the mug. She opened her journal. And for the first time in a long time, she wrote not what she wanted, but what she believed. She wrote declarations, not requests. She spoke life into rooms no one else could see yet. She began to prepare, not because she feared the storm, but because she expected the harvest. The waiting had ended, and the becoming had begun. Divine Insight to Close, Part 2. You're not late. You're right on time. The wait didn't break you. It built you. And now, heaven says move. Part 3. The fire didn't kill you. It marked you. Naomi thought the wilderness was the hardest part, until she entered the fire. It didn't come all at once. It came in waves. Betrayal, loss, silence, confusion. Seasons where prayer felt like shouting into an empty sky, where friends disappeared, where answers turned to ash. There were days the fire raged so hot she stopped asking for rescue and started praying for survival. She wasn't trying to thrive, she just wanted to breathe. But the fire didn't consume her. It transformed her. She walked through it not untouched, but marked. Marked by survival, marked by surrender, marked by sacred fire that burns off the false and reveals the divine. They say fire consumes, but for God's chosen, fire refines. Naomi's fire wasn't punishment, it was preparation. She thought she was being buried. But she was being branded by grace, branded by perseverance, branded by a God who still writes his name on those he calls his own. Because some assignments aren't given, they're survived into. The fire revealed who was real. When the flames rose, some people vanished. Some promises broke. Some supports collapsed. But the presence of God remained. In the quiet, in the confusion, in the loneliness. And Naomi discovered what it meant to be held, not by certainty, but by covenant. She discovered that peace isn't found in the absence of fire. It's found in the presence of God in the fire. The moments that should have crushed her became the moments that crowned her. Because fire doesn't just test, it authenticates. It proves what is real. It exposes what cannot last. And it purifies what is holy. Naomi was purified. Every false identity burned away. Every need for validation melted. Every fear of rejection scorched. And what remained was holy. She remembered the story of the Hebrew boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, cast into the furnace because they refused to bow to anything other than God. They didn't pray to avoid the fire. They prayed to be faithful through it. And that was Naomi's prayer too. Lord, don't just get me out. Get glory through me in it. Sometimes deliverance doesn't come by escape. It comes by endurance. And Naomi endured. There were nights when she lay on the floor, silent, not faithless, just finished. But even then, God whispered, "You're still mine." And that whisper was enough, because in the fire, God didn't just save her, he sealed her. You don't walk through fire without a mark. But Naomi's mark wasn't a scar. It was a mantle, a spiritual authority that can't be taught, only forged. You could feel it when she walked into the room. Something about her silence made noise. Something about her presence commanded stillness. She didn't speak to be heard. She spoke because heaven spoke through her, and the fire had made her trustworthy. This wasn't the kind of strength that comes from willpower. This was resurrection power. The kind of strength that comes only after dying to the version of yourself that thought survival depended on being liked, being perfect, being safe. Naomi was no longer that girl. She didn't need the crowd. She didn't crave the stage. She just needed God. And the fire had taught her He was enough. The beauty of fire is that it reveals what's fireproof. And Naomi discovered she was. Not because she never cried, not because she never doubted, but because she never quit. And that's what makes someone dangerous to darkness. Not the absence of fear, but the refusal to bow to it. Naomi rose from the fire like a phoenix. But this wasn't mythology. This was ministering. She didn't rise to prove herself. She rose to release others, to show them that scars aren't signs of shame. They're signs of survival. That fire doesn't mean God left. It means God trusted her enough to walk through something holy. The fire didn't kill Naomi. It marked her, not with bitterness, with brilliance, not with defeat, with discernment, not with fear, with fire. And now she carried it, in her eyes, in her posture, in her prayers. She was no longer simply chosen. She was commissioned, and no one could take that from her. Divine insight to close part 3. The fire didn't destroy you. It revealed you. And now you carry the mark of the unshakable. You walk not just with survival, but with sanctified strength. Part 4. They thought you were forgotten, but heaven never lost sight. There were days Naomi felt like a ghost. Not dead, but not seen. She showed up in rooms where her gifts were invisible, her voice unheard, her presence barely acknowledged. People smiled, nodded, moved on, and something inside her cracked a little more. It wasn't that she needed applause. She just wanted to matter. To someone, to anyone. But life kept writing her into the background. And eventually, she started believing that maybe God had too. She remembered the promises, the prophetic words, the dreams, the journal entries soaked in tears. But with each passing year of silence, those sacred seeds started to feel like fiction. Was I wrong? She whispered once, curled beneath her blanket as the weight of delay pressed heavy on her chest. Did I imagine it? No voice answered, just the sound of wind outside and the ache inside that whispered, maybe heaven moved on. But what Naomi didn't know is that heaven never loses track of what it plants. God doesn't forget the ones He calls. He hides them, for a time, for a reason, so they can grow in secret, so they can become rooted where no one can see. Because what grows in silence is often what lasts in storms. Naomi wasn't forgotten. She was hidden, and there's a difference. Forgotten means dismissed. Hidden means protected. Forgotten means overlooked. Hidden means preserved. The enemy couldn't attack what he couldn't locate. And God had wrapped Naomi in divine camouflage, not to punish her, but to prepare her. He was strengthening her where it mattered, in character, not charisma, in discernment, not display. Because she wasn't being raised for attention. She was being raised for assignment. Sometimes God lets people forget you, so He can remind you who you are without them. And Naomi had been reminded. Not by Instagram likes or open doors, by whispers in the dark, by peace that passed understanding, by scriptures that pulsed like lifeblood through lonely nights. She no longer needed to be remembered, because she finally remembered herself. She remembered the girl who used to dream with God. She remembered the young woman who once believed she was made for more. That girl had gone quiet for a while, but she hadn't died. She was just waiting for the signal to rise again, and heaven just gave it. There were moments Naomi felt like a tree in winter, barren, forgotten, lifeless. But underground, her roots were stretching. And now the season had shifted, and buds were forming where branches had once looked dead. There is no such thing as forgotten in the kingdom, only hidden, only protected, only prepared. Naomi didn't rise because people remembered her. She rose because heaven released her. There's a difference. One builds popularity, the other builds purpose. And what Naomi carried was far too holy to be built on applause. It had to be built in the dark, in the waiting, in the sacred silence where God does his best work. She began to realize that the rejection she feared wasn't rejection at all. It was redirection. God had shut certain doors not to deny her, but to delay her until the right moment. The exact moment where everything aligned, her healing, her identity, her assignment. And now, with the clarity of hindsight, Naomi could finally thank God for the closed doors. They didn't stop her. They saved her. The people who once passed her by would now start to take notice. But it wasn't because she changed her style or raised her voice. It was because her time had come. Heaven doesn't need man's permission to elevate a daughter. When God says it's her, then every locked gate begins to unlock. Every no starts to bow. Every closed chapter begins to flip open again. Because Naomi wasn't just remembered, she was recommissioned. This was her coming forth moment. Like Lazarus called out of a tomb. Like Joseph summoned from the prison to the palace. Like Esther brought forward for such a time as this. She hadn't missed it. She wasn't too late. She had been hidden on purpose, so heaven could reveal her on time. So she stood, not with bitterness, but with boldness, not to prove anything, but to embody everything. The silence hadn't silenced her. It had sanctified her. The darkness hadn't buried her. It had developed her. And now, the girl the world forgot was the woman heaven just unleashed. Divine Insight to Close Part 4. You weren't abandoned, you were assigned. What was hidden in silence is now being revealed in power. Part 5. Your obedience was the key. Now watch what unlocks. Obedience. It's not the word most people celebrate. It doesn't glitter. It doesn't shout. It doesn't post well on social media. But in the kingdom, obedience is the key that unlocks the miraculous. And Naomi had learned that the hard way. She didn't always obey immediately. There were times she hesitated. Times she questioned. Times she negotiated with God like he was running a poll. But every time she obeyed, even if it was slow, even if it was trembling, something shifted. Not always around her, but within her. Because obedience isn't about results. It's about alignment. And when heaven sees alignment, it responds. She remembered the moment clearly. God had asked her to do something small, insignificant almost. Reach out to someone. Say yes to a room she didn't feel ready for. Give when she barely had enough. But it made no sense on paper. It felt irrational. But something in her spirit said, this isn't a test. This is a key. So she obeyed. Not because she had clarity, but because she had conviction. And that small act of obedience, it unlocked something huge. Doors that had been shut for years cracked open. People she hadn't heard from reached out. Opportunities she never chased started finding her. But it wasn't magic. It was movement. Heaven doesn't respond to talent. It responds to trust. And obedience is trust in action. Naomi realized obedience was less about doing and more about becoming. Each yes made her lighter. Each surrender made her stronger. She didn't obey to get something. She obeyed because she was someone, the daughter, a servant, a vessel. And vessels don't ask to be famous. They ask to be faithful. In a world obsessed with visibility, Naomi learnt to value obedience in obscurity. To pray when no one saw. To show up when no one thanked her. To give when it hurt. and heaven kept track of every hidden yes. Because in the kingdom, nothing is wasted. One act of obedience in the quiet can unlock a public breakthrough. That's what happened to Naomi. She wasn't climbing. She wasn't pushing. She was walking, one step at a time, one yes at a time, until suddenly everything began to shift. But it wasn't sudden. It was the harvest of obedience. What people call overnight blessings are often years of quiet obedience finally reaching their appointed time. Naomi's obedience had built something, not a platform, a path. And now that path was leading her into purpose. Obedience is costly. It asks you to risk being misunderstood. It asks you to release comfort. It asks you to move without guarantees. But the rewards of obedience, they are eternal. For every sleepless night, she trusted God's voice. For every opportunity she turned down because it didn't align with His whisper. For every yes that scared her into tears, heaven was preparing a release. And it came, not just in blessings, but in becoming. Naomi wasn't chasing the promise anymore. She had become the kind of person who could hold it. The key had always been obedience. And now, doors were swinging open wide. She walked through them, not as someone who forced her way in, but as someone who was invited. Because obedience doesn't beg. It builds. She didn't just obey in one moment. She lived a lifestyle of yes. Yes in the valley, yes in the confusion. Yes, even when she couldn't see what it would lead to. And every yes had heaven's fingerprint on it. Now, that fingerprint was turning into a full-blown unveiling. People were beginning to notice, not because Naomi was louder, but because she had aligned. Obedience had brought her into resonance with heaven. And when you're in resonance, even your whisper shakes things. She didn't need to prove anything. The fruit of her obedience spoke for her. She had planted tears and prayers in soil that no one saw. Now she was harvesting joy and breakthrough in full view. But people who once thought she was being foolish, the ones who said she was too deep, too slow, too trusting, they were now watching doors swing open that no hustle could have unlocked. Because hustle can build moments, but only obedience can build movements. Naomi was now walking in divine movement, and she knew it. Not with pride, but with peace. Because peace is the fruit of knowing you're exactly where God told you to be. No striving, no proving, just obedience. And obedience had done what nothing else could. It had unlocked everything. A divine insight to close part 5. Obedience isn't glamorous, but it's glorious. What you surrendered in secret is about to be honored in public. Heaven is responding to your yes. Part 6. The shift they can't deny is already happening. You tried to hide it. The way your walk started to change. The way your prayers grew bolder. The way peace started lingering longer than pain. But some things can't be hidden. Not when heaven has already revealed them. And Naomi was living proof. The shift had begun, and everyone around her could feel it, even the ones who didn't want to admit it. The shift didn't announce itself with lightning or applause. It came like a whisper, steady, sure, undeniable. One day she woke up and noticed the weight in her chest was gone. The anxiety that once stole her breath had loosened its grip. The fear that used to drive her was now replaced by faith. And it wasn't loud, but it was real. There was a stillness in her spirit that couldn't be explained, only experienced. Naomi wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. She was becoming what she always was beneath the wounds. Becoming what she had only glimpsed in her dreams. Becoming the version of herself that no longer bowed to fear, shame, or delay. Some people noticed and celebrated. Others noticed and withdrew. Because transformation always reveals what was hidden, both in you and in them. When Naomi changed, it confronted what others refused to. Her growth made some uncomfortable. Her peace exposed their chaos. Her obedience shined light on their compromise. But she didn't apologize for it. because the shift wasn't for them, that it was for God. She was finally walking in step with heaven, and it was showing. Divine alignment doesn't need to announce itself. It reveals itself in how you move, in how you speak, in how you stay calm when others would have crumbled. People started whispering, "She's different now." But Naomi didn't need to respond, because the shift was her response. She no longer reacted to attacks. She no longer explained her obedience. She just moved. With grace, with power, with clarity. And even those who once dismissed her had to admit something had changed. She had changed, and it wasn't subtle. Her conversations carried weight. Her silence carried presence. Her decisions, once second-guessed, were now made in peace. Because the shift isn't just a season, it's a sign that you've crossed over, that the wilderness is behind you, that God's timing has collided with your obedience. And once that happens, there's no going back. Naomi didn't need validation. She had vision. And vision always makes the room uncomfortable before it makes it better. But she wasn't living for comfort. She was living for calling. And the shift made that clear. Everywhere she went, atmosphere changed. People paused. Doors opened. Not because Naomi forced it, because Naomi became it. She embodied the shift. And now, everyone else had to catch up. Naomi remembered what it felt like to sit in rooms and feel like a shadow, like her presence didn't matter, like her words were just echoes. Now, the same rooms turned when she walked in, not out of ego, but out of essence. Because something happens when your spirit aligns with your assignment. You start to carry weight, not the kind that burdens, the kind that breaks chains. People didn't understand how she got there, but she did. Through fire, through faith, through fierce obedience in silence. There's a moment when heaven no longer hides you, when the hidden years have served their purpose, when the pruning turns into platform, when the crushing turns into clarity. This was Naomi's moment. She had walked through her 7 days of silent Jericho marching, and now the walls were falling, not just around her, but within her. Walls of unworthiness, walls of fear, walls of not yet. And with every brick that fell, boldness rose. She wasn't asking if she was allowed. She knew she was assigned. She wasn't asking for permission. She was answering her purpose. And the shift became undeniable. The same people who once questioned her fire now stood warmed by it. The same voices that once silenced her, they'll asked for her wisdom. And the difference wasn't her talent, it was her timing. God had released her. When heaven releases a soul, no opinion can stop it. No doubt can delay it. No resistance can reverse it. Naomi's friends began to ask, what changed? And she smiled, not because she had all the answers, but because she finally had peace. I stopped chasing moments and started aligning with my mission, because alignment creates access, and access reveals authority. Naomi moved with authority, not because she had a platform, but because she had presence. And presence doesn't come from position. It comes from being positioned by God. What Naomi carried wasn't temporary. It wasn't conditional. It wasn't for show, but it was sacred. And sacred things carry evidence. Evidence that you've been with God. Evidence that you've been through fire. Evidence that you've come out changed. This was Naomi's evidence, not words. Witness. Her life was a witness to what happens when you obey even when it hurts. When you sow in silence. When you kneel in secret. When you choose God's pace over man's pressure. And now the shift wasn't just visible. It was irrefutable. Heaven had spoken, and earth had to make room. Divine insight to close part 6. The shift isn't coming, it's here. And no one, not even your enemies, can deny what God is doing in you now. Part 7. Your character carried you where hustle couldn't. There was a time Naomi believed she had to prove herself, that if she just worked harder, tried more, smiled bigger, hustled longer, the world would finally open its arms. She thought blessing came through burnout. That favor was earned by exhaustion. But God never asked her to hustle. He asked her to heal. And when she stopped chasing validation, she finally found victory. Naomi had seen what striving produced. Sleepless nights, frantic comparison, anxiety dressed up as ambition. She'd been applauded by people, but unseen by herself, because hustle might win attention, but only character holds anointing. And it was Naomi's character that carried her into rooms her hustle never could. She had watched others climb fast, only to fall harder. She had witnessed gifted people implode under the pressure their integrity couldn't sustain. And she decided she would rather rise slow and stay steady than rise fast and fall apart. So she chose truth over trend, stillness over speed, presence over performance. Each of those choices cost her something, but they built something better. Character doesn't glitter. It doesn't always get noticed, but it gets rewarded. Naomi chose integrity over image. She chose patience over pressure. She chose quiet growth over loud gains. And heaven noticed. Her reward didn't come from man. It came from God. Because what's built on character lasts. What's built on hustle burns out. She turned down deals that felt lucrative but lacked peace. She said no to relationships that praised her gifts but dismissed her soul. And in the silence of those no's, God was shaping her yes. The yes that mattered. The one heaven had been waiting for. There were rooms Naomi could have entered earlier if she compromised. But she chose the long road, the slow road, the sacred road. She passed on opportunities that would have fed her ego but starved her soul. And now she was reaping legacy. Naomi had no idea the choices she made in silence would echo so loudly in her future. Each sacrifice planted seeds. Seeds that grew into trust. And trust turned into territory. The land Naomi walked in now, spiritually, emotionally, even financially, wasn't given to her because she hustled. It was entrusted to her because she was faithful. God doesn't bless the fastest. He blesses the faithful. The world loves results. Heaven loves roots. And Naomi had deep roots. Roots that didn't sway in the wind. Roots that didn't move when others ran ahead. She had learned that deep roots are what allow trees to bear fruit in every season. And her season was coming. Not because she pushed, but because she prepared. Naomi's heart had been tested, in secret places, in lonely places, when no one was watching, when no applause followed her obedience. She chose right when wrong felt easier. She stayed when leaving felt safer. She prayed when quitting felt easier. And now, those choices had built something inside her that the world could no longer ignore. Her spirit carried substance. She had been refined. Not by hustle, but by holiness. There's a confidence that comes from knowing you didn't force anything, that the doors opening now were assigned, not achieved. Naomi walked through each door with quiet confidence, not because of who she was, but because of what God had built in her. She no longer feared falling, because she knew what was holding her up. It wasn't charisma, it was character, and character doesn't crack. Others began to notice, not just what Naomi did, but who Naomi was becoming. Her peace was magnetic. Her words carried weight. Her presence brought clarity. Because when you let God build your character, you become a vessel for His power. People don't remember what you hustle for. They remember what you carry. And Naomi carried something holy, something time couldn't steal, something critics couldn't shake, something fame couldn't fabricate. She carried anointing. And anointing flows through character, not hustle. Divine insight to close, part 7. Your hustle tried to carry you, but it was your character that brought you through the door. And heaven is not looking for hustle, it's looking for holiness. Part 8. You were hidden for a reason, but now it's time. There is a sacred silence that covers God's chosen ones before their unveiling. It's not rejection, it's protection. And Naomi had lived under that silence for years. Not overlooked, but obscured. Hidden by God. Not because she wasn't ready, but because others weren't. Because when God hides you, it's not to punish you. It's to preserve you. He was keeping her safe. He was building her strength. He was preparing her soul. Until the moment came where he said, "Now, daughter, now it's time." Naomi didn't resent the hiding anymore. She had come to revere it. Because what she gained in the shadows became her armor in the light. She learned to hear God when no one else listened. She learned to trust his whisper more than man's applause. Now, as the spotlight began to turn, she didn't flinch. Because she wasn't performing. She was positioned. She wasn't chasing visibility. She was stepping into divine timing. And the hiding had prepared her for the revealing. Now, it was time. She could feel it in the way her prayers shifted. No longer asking when, God. Now declaring, "I'm ready, Lord." There is something holy about hiddenness. It's where God carves identity, where he cuts away fear, where he sanctifies motives and deepens faith. Naomi had walked through this quiet wilderness, not knowing she was walking straight into promise. She had watched others rise while she stayed in the background, and still she stayed faithful. She had seen others promoted while her work went unseen, and still she worshipped. Because the hidden season wasn't punishment, it was preparation. She wasn't behind, she was becoming. And now, what was once hidden in her would soon be impossible to ignore. Not because she was louder, but because she was rooted. People always notice the bloom, but God treasures the root. And Naomi's roots were deep, built in silence, built in terrors, built in late nights of unanswered prayers and unseen faithfulness. When the unveiling comes, it's not to make you famous, it's to make you fruitful. And Naomi's fruit was ripe. She no longer questioned the delay. She had learned that what God withholds temporarily, he prepares eternally. Some blessings are too heavy to carry before your soul is ready. And now, her soul was ready. The invitations began to come. Rooms she once only dreamed of, now opened to her. Conversations shifted. Her voice carried weight. But she didn't rise with ego. She rose with reverence. Because she knew what it cost to carry that calling. She had been through the fire. She had been misunderstood. She had walked alone. But now she walked anointed. Heaven had whispered to the earth, "Unveil her." And no man could stop what God had begun. When Naomi entered new spaces, she carried an authority born of obedience. She didn't hustle her way there. She was heralded in, because heaven always honors what is hidden for the right time. There's a divine release that comes when you've passed the test of obscurity. And Naomi had passed it, with trembling faith, with quiet strength, with relentless trust. Now the stage wasn't a performance. It was a platform, not for her ego, but for his glory. God had not wasted a single moment of her waiting. The delays were not dead ends, they were detours of mercy. She had been spared from rooms that would have devoured her, from relationships that would have drained her, from platforms that would have poisoned her. But now, everything had changed. The timing was different. The atmosphere was different. She was different, because the waiting had worked, and the one who had been hidden was now ready. It didn't happen overnight. There were years of sowing where no harvest appeared. There were prayers that felt like echoes. There were moments of near giving up, but she held on, even with trembling hands. And that grip of faith, no matter how weak it felt, was enough for God. Because he isn't looking for perfection, he's looking for persistence. And Naomi persisted. She didn't just survive the hidden season. She surrendered to it. She let it make her wise. She let it make her soft. She let it break her pride and build her purpose. And when the time came, she didn't have to knock on the door. The door opened, because the unveiling of a chosen one is never man-made. It is heaven-timed. Some who once overlooked her now asked for her voice. Some who once questioned her silence now leaned in to listen. But Naomi didn't move for applause. She moved for assignment. And the one who was once hidden, who now became a lighthouse. Because what's been tested in private can stand in public. And Naomi had been tested through the silence, through the sorrow, through the solitude. And now it was time. You weren't buried, you were planted. And now the season of unveiling has come. Heaven has whispered, now it's time.
Part 9. They can't understand why God chose you, but He did. You've heard their questions. By her. By him. Why would God choose them? But what they don't understand is this. God doesn't choose based on man's measurements. He chooses based on His mission. And Naomi was on assignment. She didn't look the part. Didn't sound like the loudest. Didn't move with hype or hunger for validation. But heaven had marked her. And when heaven marks you, no explanation will satisfy people who only see surface. Naomi had learned to stop explaining and start walking. She didn't owe clarity to the crowd. She owed obedience to her Creator. And though whispers followed her rise, she walked in peace. Because when God chooses you, He equips you. When He assigns you, He affirms you. Naomi stopped looking for outside validation. She found her confirmation in His presence. And that was enough. She didn't audition for favor. She was anointed for purpose. And even though some rolled their eyes or closed their hearts, they could not deny the results. There's a grace on the chosen that confuses the carnal. Naomi moved with grace they didn't understand. She was covered when others were. She was elevated when others were forgotten, because she was covered by God. Favor isn't always fair. It's sovereign. Naomi heard what they said. She felt the glances, the resistance, but she didn't let it change her direction, because God had spoken. And when God speaks over your life, the opinions of others lose their power. And she remembered the stories of Joseph misunderstood by his brothers, of David left out in the field, of Mary pregnant with promise, judged for the process. And she wasn't alone. And she was in divine company, the misunderstood, the misjudged, the marked. You see, God doesn't need agreement from others to use you. He needs your yes. And Naomi had said yes, not with fanfare, but with faith. When you're chosen, your process looks different. A path feels lonelier. Lessons come deeper, because you're not being prepared for public applause. You're being refined for private alignment. Naomi knew this, and she embraced the refinement, even when it hurt, even when it cost her relationships, even when she had to walk away from places where she no longer fit. And now, people started to notice. Not just what she carried, but how she carried it. With peace, with humility, with power. They didn't understand it, but they couldn't deny it, because the light on Naomi's life wasn't artificial. It was eternal. She had been in the fire and didn't smell like smoke. She had been through the silence and still heard God's voice. She had passed through rejection and come out more rooted. They wondered how she kept showing up, how she kept smiling, how she stayed grounded when others would have crumbled. But Naomi didn't try to explain, because some things aren't taught. They're revealed. The oil on her life came at a cost, and only heaven knew the price. The same mouths that gossiped would one day testify. The same eyes that rolled would soon recognize. Because when you walk with God, the fruit speaks louder than the critics. Naomi's fruit was undeniable. Peace and pressure. joy in the midst of sorrow, clarity in confusion, authority in silence. Not man-made, but God sent. Yes, they questioned her, but heaven commissioned her, and she no longer asked, "Why me?" She declared, "Use me." Because when you realize you're chosen, you stop needing permission. You move different, not for attention, but with authority. You don't perform, you presence yourself. You don't chase, you carry. Naomi carried wisdom, she carried discernment, and she carried spiritual weight. And that kind of authority, it can't be fabricated. It's forged in seasons no one saw, forged in prayers no one heard, forged in heartbreak no one knew about. The people who didn't understand her didn't have to, because Naomi didn't come to be understood, but she came to complete her assignment. And heaven was watching. And God didn't ask her to be impressive. He asked her to be available. And that's exactly what she was. You see, the chosen don't walk in arrogance. They walk in awareness. Naomi wasn't arrogant. She was anchored. She wasn't loud. She was lit from within. And her presence started shifting rooms. Her voice began piercing through fog. Because the chosen don't just carry words. They carry fire. A fire that refines. A fire that awakens. A fire that reveals. So when they whispered, heaven responded, because I saw her in the secret place. Because she didn't quit when no one clapped. Because she said yes when it cost her everything. God doesn't choose the loudest, but He chooses the loyal. And Naomi had been loyal to the call, to the silence, to the process. And now, God was faithful to reveal what He had built in her. Divine insight to close part 9. You weren't chosen to be understood. You were chosen to be obedient. God's favor isn't fair, it's sovereign. Part 10. You've passed the test. Now step into the crown. There comes a moment in every chosen one's life where the testing season ends and the crowning begins. Not a crown of gold, but a crown of glory. Naomi didn't fight for it. She became it. After every trial, every delay, every betrayal, she didn't just survive, she passed. The furnace didn't burn her, it forged her. And now, the shift was undeniable. The wilderness season had closed. The crown was waiting. But not just any crown, the kind heaven places. The kind that isn't worn with pride but carried with purpose. The kind that doesn't elevate you above others, but calls you to serve them. Naomi stepped forward. Not because she was the strongest, not because she was the loudest, but because she endured. And when you endure with faith, heaven crowns you with authority. She had passed tests no one saw, fought battles no one applauded, ate when it cost her everything. Now, the crown fit. Because the crown isn't just for those who are gifted. It's for those who are faithful. Naomi's hand shook as she received it. Not out of fear, but reverence. Because the weight of glory isn't light. But to the one who's been prepared, it's right. And she looked back one last time. Not in regret, but in awe. At how God had carried her. At what He had built in the silence. At how everything that broke her also birthed her. Every no had been a redirection. Every loss had made room. Every delay had deepened her roots. And now, heaven wasn't asking her to hustle. It was asking her to receive. Naomi had never seen herself as royalty. But God had always known. And she had been crowned long before she could carry it. But the process had shaped her shoulders. Now she could stand under the weight of the mantle. She remembered the garden seasons. The weeping, the wrestling, and the waiting. Those weren't wasted. They're worship. And now they would become her witness. Because the crown doesn't just mark elevation, it demands transformation. And Naomi had been transformed. No trumpet sounded, no crowd shouted, but the heavens opened, and the voice that had guided her through the wilderness whispered, "Well done, daughter. Now walk in what I gave you." Tears streamed as she nodded. She didn't feel bigger. She felt smaller, in awe of a God who used everything to shape her. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the years of feeling behind, all of it, used not to destroy her, but to develop her. This was not the end. It was the beginning of leadership, of legacy, of living in full alignment. Naomi's life would never be the same. Not because her name was known, but because his name was revealed through her. She had passed the test. And the crown she wore was invisible, but unmistakable. Because when heaven crowns you, no man can take it. And the world cannot explain it. She walked now with fire in her bones. Not performance, not pressure, but present. Her presence changed rooms. Because it carried what can't be taught, only transferred. The fruit of faithfulness. The residue of obedience. The anointing of a life fully surrendered. You didn't just survive the test, you passed it. Now receive what heaven has reserved for you. Not a trophy for striving, but a crown for surrender. The crown, the calling, and the cross. She didn't ask for the crown, she was prepared for it. Not by fame, not by ease, but by fire. Naomi's journey, from hidden to heralded, from weeping to wisdom, from isolation to influence, is not just a story. It's a sacred blueprint. God never wastes a wilderness. And what looked like silence was actually shaping. Every no was holy redirection. Every delay was sacred preservation. Every tear was a seed in the soil of destiny. You too may be in a season that doesn't make sense. But heaven sees you. And if this message found you now, it wasn't random. It was revealed. You've been tested, now it's time to be trusted. You've been crushed, now you carry oil. You've walked alone, now you carry authority. The crown isn't for comfort, it's for calling. So wear it with humility, carry it with courage, and never forget. The cross came before the crown. And the one who wore thorns is the one who anointed you. God doesn't call the perfect, he calls the willing. It's never too late to be used by him. Old age isn't abandonment, it's harvest season. Obscurity is preparation, not punishment. You weren't overlooked, you were reserved. If this story stirred something in you, don't let it pass in silence. Comment below. I'm stepping into what God reserved for me. Share this message with someone who needs to remember they're chosen. Support the journey. Pray with us. Walk with us. Witness what happens when a soul says yes. Heaven has spoken. Now the earth is watching what you'll do with it. This is your crown moment. Step into it.